This was, without a doubt, one of the worst days of Tessa's life. When she had woken up that morning from a restful sleep, she remembered being in a particularly good mood. It wasn't like the sun was smiling down on her and the birds were singing outside her window, but for someone who wasn't a morning person, it was nice not waking up feeling tired and miserable for once. However, as she made her way down the stairs of her grandparents' small two-story home, she stopped halfway down when she overheard her grandparents mention her father. Her good mood instantly vanished. Considering she hadn't spoken to her father since Christmas, her curiosity as to why her grandparents were suddenly talking about him was enough to make her stop walking and eavesdrop on the rest of their conversation. As it turned out, her father had called the house just before she woke up trying to get in contact with Tessa, but her grandparents didn't want to tell her because of how distant he had been these past few years. When Tessa finally walked into the kitchen to be greeted by her grandparents, she had decided not to let on that she had overheard their conversation. But the thought of why her father had suddenly tried to reach out to her after all this time kept her distracted for the rest of the morning. It wasn't until she saw Josh on the way to her class that she managed to momentarily forget about her father. She figured that the sweet, but slightly awkward guy she sat next to in French class might be able to improve her mood. But instead, he revealed to her that he had just gotten into a fight at lunch, and was probably going to get suspended. He then blew Tessa off and made her already bad mood even worse. Tessa assumed that she wouldn't be seeing Josh again anytime soon, so you can imagine her shock when he suddenly burst through the door of the computer room less than an hour later. Before Tessa could figure out what he was doing there, Josh was shoving her across the room. Shocked at why he was doing this, she looked up at Josh for an explanation, but in the blink of an eye, a giant glowing rock smashed through the ceiling. Tessa recalled instinctively covering her head with her hands when the meteor hit, but then everything went dark. The smell of smoke brought Tessa back to consciousness. Her eyes snapped open and the first thing she saw was a dark gray sky. This confused her at first, as she could have sworn that she had just been inside the computer room working on her French project. All of a sudden, she remembered the giant yellow rock that had crashed into the school, and realized why she could clearly see the sky. It was because the impact of the rock had almost completely destroyed part of the school. Tessa immediately tried to sit up, but her body didn't react properly. Panic began to set in as she realized that something might be seriously wrong with her. She took a deep breath to try and calm herself, but when she did, she immediately started to choke on the smoke that was quickly filling the area. After Tessa caught her breath, she noticed a faint yellow light off to her left. With some difficulty, she turned onto her stomach and began crawling towards the giant hole in the floor where the light was coming from. It took way more effort than it should have for Tessa to crawl across what remained of the floor. It was as if all the energy had been drained out of her. When Tessa finally made it to the hole in the floor where the yellow light was coming from, she peered into it and saw the giant rock that had crashed into the school. All around the rock, the school was in shambles. The impact of the rock had caused a domino effect of destruction, and it seemed that nearly everything in the hallway where it landed was destroyed. Tessa also discovered that the source of the smoke was a small fire that was caused by the rock's impact. And that fire was quickly spreading through the main floor of the building, engulfing everything in its path. However, despite the looming threat of the fire, she hardly paid it any attention, because the only thing she could focus on was the warm glow of the rock. As Tessa stared at the faint pulsing glow of the giant rock, she could feel its warmth washing over her, and she immediately began to feel better. The smoke that was wafting up through the hole no longer bothered her, and she hardly noticed the heat from the fire. She began to feel some of her strength returning, and after a few seconds of lying there, she knew that she was now strong enough to stand up, but she didn't want to. All she wanted to do was stare at the rock and watch as its pulsing yellow light slowly grew dimmer and dimmer until, finally, the rock went dark. With the rock's glowing yellow light now gone, Tessa came back to her senses and stood up. She looked around at the brick, wood, computers, and other debris scattered around her and thought how lucky she was that nothing had fallen on her. As Tessa began to contemplate the best way of getting out of the school, she wondered why there wasn't anyone around. It was almost as if everyone else had known about the rock and had left the school before it had hit. But why didn't anyone warn her? Tessa gasped when she realized that someone had tried to warn her. Josh! He had run into the computer room right before the rock hit the building. But where was he now? Tessa frantically looked around the destroyed computer room before her eyes fell back to the hole in the floor where Josh had been standing when the rock hit, which meant that the rock she was so hypnotized by just seconds earlier was sitting on the body of the boy who had tried to rescue her. Tears began to well in her eyes as Tessa took a step back from the hole in the floor. The warmth from the meteor that had filled her whole body and gave her strength was now turning into a white, hot rage. That stupid giant rock came out of nowhere and killed poor Josh, who'd only been trying to help her. The more Tessa thought about Josh, the more her sadness turned into anger. And with that anger was a strength that she had never known before. She felt powerful and full of energy, as if she had just drank 10 coffees and all that caffeine was hitting her all at once. At first, she enjoyed this feeling of being strong and powerful, but her anger was quickly taking control of her until the only thing Tessa could think about was punching something. Her vision began to turn yellow, and at first, Tessa thought this was because the rock was glowing again, but she realized that everything she was looking at now had a yellow tint. "What is happening to me?" she says out loud. That white-hot rage that was burning through Tessa's body started feeling a little too hot. Tessa grimaced in pain as her entire body suddenly felt like it was burning from the inside out. She closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around herself to try and relieve some of that burning pain, but it didn't work. That pain caused her to lose all of the sudden anger she had built up, and with that anger gone, Tessa instantly felt her strength fade, and she collapsed onto the ground. She opened her eyes, her vision now fuzzy from the pain, and found herself once again looking at the rock. The pain was burning so intensely that Tessa couldn't move, couldn't speak, could hardly even breathe. The only thing she could do was stare at the rock as she began to lose consciousness. Just as the world was starting to go black, something happened. The rock moved. Tessa assumed that the amount of pain she was in was causing her to hallucinate. However, just as Tessa passed out from the pain, she was almost certain that something, or someone, was lifting the giant rock off the ground.
I never imagined being dead would hurt so much. I always figured that when you died, your body just went numb and you no longer felt any pain. Yet, as I lie there, unmoving and unconscious, certain that I'm dead, I can clearly feel the severe and constant pain that I'm in. From the stories I've heard of people having near-death experiences, their entire lives would flash before their eyes until they woke up. However, the only thing that I see is utter darkness. That is, until I notice a faint yellow light in the depths of my unconscious mind slowly growing brighter. My first thought is that this is the bright light people in movies always talked about walking towards when they're dying. Part of me immediately wants to try and move towards it because I know my father will be waiting there for me. But the logical part of me knows that I'm too young to die and I should do whatever I can to avoid the light. However, the light doesn't give me any time to decide and instead continues to grow brighter and brighter until all I can see is yellow, even though my eyes are closed. Although the yellow light is now extremely bright, it doesn't feel uncomfortable or painful to look at. The light actually feels warm and comforting, and the longer I stare at it, the more I begin to forget about the severe pain that I'm in. It isn't until my pain is completely gone that I realize my eyes have been closed the entire time. So I open them and find that I'm still staring at a bright yellow light. But this light is no pathway to the afterlife. It's the meteor that had crashed into the school and landed on me. Despite the fact that I know this meteor is pinning me in place and has most likely caused me countless injuries, I can't stop staring at it in amazement. Its yellow, pulsing light is washing over me and filling me with such warmth and strength that I actually get a bit sad when the light eventually fades and I'm left staring at a dark space rock. With the light from the meteor no longer distracting me, I take a deep breath and realize that even though I'm currently pinned underneath the meteor, I feel incredible. Not only did the light from the meteor relieve the pain that I was in, but it also made me feel more powerful than I've ever felt before. However, it doesn't matter how good I feel because unless I do something, I'm going to end up suffocating under the meteor. Somehow, I managed to pull my arms back a bit so that I can place both my hands on the meteor. The surface of the meteor is warm to the touch, and as I lightly push against it to feel how sturdy it is, I expect it to be as solid as, well, as a rock. Yet the strangest thing happens when I push against it. I feel it move. It doesn't move very much, but I can feel the giant rock shift on top of me. Considering how massive this thing is, it should be impossible for me to move it. And yet, I felt it shift after only slightly pushing against it. What would happen if I pushed harder? Even though it has been a while since I've gone to the gym, I still remember the proper form for doing the bench press. However, as I try my best to plant my feet on the ground and pinch my shoulder blades together, I realize how stupid I am, thinking I can lift this thing off me. The last time I bench pressed, I could barely lift 115 pounds. And here I am trying to lift a meteor that probably weighs the same as a small car. Ignoring all of my doubts, I take a few deep, slow breaths to try and calm myself down and prepare for this heavy lift. For some reason, I can still feel the effects of the yellow light that the meteor had given off, and all the pain and fear that I had felt when the meteor first crashed onto me is now replaced by strength. It feels like every muscle in my body is pulsing with power, and I'm as confident as I could be that I'll be able to move this thing. However, when I once again place both my hands on the meteor, I immediately pull them back in surprise when I feel how hot it is. The rock had only been slightly warm to the touch seconds ago, but it now felt like it had just finished cooking in a giant oven. At the rate the temperature is increasing, this thing is going to be too hot for me to touch in a few seconds. So, it's now or never. I firmly place my hands back on the meteor and ignore the heat coming off it. My heart is beating heavily as I take a few more deep breaths, and then push with everything I have. The meteor is far heavier than any weight that I've lifted before, and I instantly want to drop it, but I keep pushing. I can feel the weight being lifted off my chest as the meteor begins to slowly rise. Knowing that I'm actually somehow doing this helps keep me going until my arms are fully extended. As I lie on the ground holding the meteor above me, hardly able to breathe from the strain, a little voice in the back of my head says, "Now what?" The weight may be lifted off of me, but if I let go of it now, then it'll just fall right back on top of me. I stare at the meteor, thinking that my best course of action would be to try and throw it down off to my left to give me a chance to roll out of the way. Just as I'm about to try this, I notice the meteor once again begins to glow. But it isn't glowing the warm yellow color that had relieved my pain and enhanced my strength. It's now glowing a hot, dangerous looking red that grows brighter by the second. The sudden change in color confuses me for a moment until I'm snapped back to reality when the heat coming off the meteor hits me. It is way hotter than before, and I have no clue how my hands aren't burning. But I know that I can't hold this thing much longer. As I'm about to try throwing it off to my left, I realize what this glowing, hot red color means. This thing is going to explode. Panic begins to set in as my elbows start shaking from the strain of holding the meteor up for so long. I can't just set this thing off to the side, because if it explodes, then there's no telling how much damage it might cause. The only option is to get this thing as far away from the school as possible. But how the hell can I do that? I could throw it, I think to myself. The rational part of my brain that would normally tell me how that is the stupidest idea I've ever come up with must have been silenced by the pain center of the brain that's begging me to get rid of this thing because I actually think this is a good idea. But first things first, I have to get into a position to throw the meteor out of the school the same way it came in. And if I thought bench pressing this meteor and holding it in the air for over a minute while I came up with a plan was hard, doing a sit-up while holding said giant meteor makes that look like a cakewalk. Yet somehow I managed to move from lying on my back to a seated position, but I'm not done yet. While the meteor continues to grow in both color and heat, I move from my seated position to one knee so that it looks like I'm going to propose to the giant rock that threatens to crush me. From one knee, I grit my teeth and grunt in agony as I stand up, holding the meteor above my head with both arms fully extended. I stand in place for a second and try to catch my breath. With the meteor no longer blocking my view of the rest of the school, I notice all of the destruction it caused when it crashed into the building. To top that off, it had also started a fire that is raging all around me. However, I hardly notice the heat from the fire because the meteor is now burning so hot that it seems like it'll explode at any second. I have to get this thing out of the school now. With no better idea than just throwing it as hard as I can, I slowly shift the weight of the meteor from two hands to one, not even stopping to consider how none of what I'm doing is humanly possible. Blood pounds in my ears so loudly that I can't even hear the flames that roar around me. I hold the meteor in my hand like a giant baseball, and with one last burst of energy, I take a step forward and throw the meteor as hard as I can. I don't realize I'm screaming until the giant rock leaves my hand and sails up through the same hole in the third floor where it first crashed. Exhausted, I watch the meteor leave the building and expect it to land just outside the school a few meters away. Instead, it soars straight up through the air and way further from the school than I ever would have thought. I then start to panic a little when I realize that the meteor might end up landing in a populated area and exploding. Luckily, I don't have to worry about that for long because the second I see the meteor begin to descend, The entire thing glows so brightly that it looks like a small red sun, and I have to avert my eyes. Although I can't watch the explosion because of how bright the meteor is, I can easily hear the massive boom, which is loud enough to destroy the rest of the intact glass in the school. As I turn back to look up at the meteor, I take a moment to watch the small mushroom cloud disperse high above me. Then I fall to my knees, both exhausted and confused, but mostly confused. However, with the threats of the meteor now gone, I look around the destroyed, burning school and realize that the danger is far from over. I force myself back to my feet and figure that I should check my hands to see how badly damaged they are from lifting the meteor. When I look down at them, I'm shocked when I discover that they look perfectly fine. I then begin to examine the rest of my body for any major injuries, and I finally realize where my strength had come from. "What the hell?" I say out loud. The majority of my t-shirt had been burned off from the heat of the meteor, and only a few pieces of fabric are left to cover parts of my chest and back. I rip those pieces of fabric off and see a set of abs bulging out of my stomach where all you could normally see were my ribs. My arms have at least tripled in size, my shoulders feel broader, and my formerly non-existent pecs now look like they've been chiseled out of stone. I continue to look down to find that, thank God, my jeans are almost completely intact, and just look like someone had attacked them with a pair of scissors. However, my ruined jeans do reveal that my quads and calves have also become way more muscular than before, and even my glutes look bigger. I have no idea how any of this is possible, but after hating how skinny I was for so long, I actually smile at my transformed body, despite the danger I am still in. I reach up and touch my necklace, which luckily still hangs around my neck unharmed. Then I pat the pockets of my partly intact jeans and feel my phone and my father's picture still inside the pockets. I can't tell what kind of shape they are in, but now isn't the time to look. The last thing I take a moment to search for are my glasses, which is pointless because they would have gotten crushed when the meteor hit me. Plus, as I search for them, I realize that my vision has somehow drastically improved. As shocked as I am by my sudden transformation, I'll have to figure out what is going on with me later because I need to get out of the school. I glance all around the main floor of the building, but no matter which direction I look, all I can see is a wall of fire blocking any potential exits. So I once again find myself looking up at the giant hole above me to see if there is a way out of the school up there. As I look, I notice someone's arm dangling over the edge of the hole, and I remember that there is still someone else in the building, Tessa. With everything that had happened, I completely forgot about her, and I immediately feel terrible. However, I don't have time to feel bad about forgetting about her because it looks like she's still unconscious up there. So I have to get up to her and then get both of us out of the school. Luckily, a small section of the ceiling that had collapsed from the impact seems to have formed an almost ramp up to the hole above me. Without pausing to consider if this ramp made of debris is even stable, I take a step towards it. When I do, I realize that the bottom of my sneakers had also burned away from the heat of the meteor, so I kick them off and make my way over to the ramp in my bare feet. The ramp turns out to be as stable as it looks. It shakes like crazy as I quickly climb up it, but thankfully, it holds together under my weight. As soon as I make it to the top of the debris, I jump onto what remains of the computer room floor and feel a few cracks open up beneath my feet when I land. Now that I'm close enough to Tessa to see her more clearly, I almost don't recognize her. Apparently, I'm not the only one who now looks a lot different. Tessa looks as though she had lost 30 pounds, yet her sudden weight loss doesn't make her look skinny and sickly. I can tell just by looking at her that, like me, her arm and back muscles are much more chiseled and developed. I'm willing to bet that her lower body has also become way more muscular. However, I actively try to avoid checking her out while she's unconscious because the last thing I want is for her to suddenly wake up and think I'm a pervert. As I bend down and check her pulse, I'm able to see that her face also looks a bit slimmer, and her high cheekbones are now much more prominent. It's a bit weird seeing her like this because I always thought Tessa looked beautiful just the way she was because she looked perfectly normal. Now she looks like some kind of Instagram fitness model, and honestly, I'm having trouble concentrating on listening to her pulse because of her huge change in appearance. When I feel Tessa's pulse beating faintly beneath my fingers, I pull them away and know that it is time to get us both out of here. I carefully pick Tessa up, thankful that her clothes are almost fully intact. It would have been extremely awkward if they had burned away like mine and I had to carry around a naked teenage girl. I'm a bit surprised by how light Tessa feels in my arms, but I had just thrown a giant meteor through the roof of a school, so I guess I shouldn't really be surprised. With Tessa now safely in my arms, I head towards the computer room door, but find that it's covered with debris. Luckily, most of the debris covering the door is fairly light and small, I'm able to easily kick it out of the way. I then walk through the door and into the hallway, which is completely engulfed in flames. The rational side of me knows that with this much fire and smoke surrounding us, Tessa and I should be badly burned by now. However, I barely feel the heat coming off the flames, and as far as I can tell, neither does Tessa. So I run down the burning hallway while trying to avoid the worst of the blaze. Once I manage to make it to the end of the hallway, I turn to see the set of stairs that can take us down to the main floor. However, between us and those stairs is a hallway full of flaming debris that'll be impossible to get through. I take a quick look around the area for another way out of the school and spot a closed classroom door to my left. I kick open the door and walk inside the room to find an empty classroom untouched by the fire. Although it is nice to have a break from the fire and smoke for a second, I still have to find another way to get us out of the school. After carefully lying Tessa down on top of a desk, I walk over to the back wall of the classroom and place my hand against it. The wall is cool to the touch, meaning that the fire also hasn't yet reached the classroom next to us. With what is probably my 10th insane idea of the day in mind, I back up to the other side of the classroom and then run as fast as I can at the wall. I somehow break through it like it's made of paper instead of brick, creating a hole just big enough for me to fit through. Now in the neighboring empty classroom, I once again run at the far wall at top speed and smash through it, while trying to resist the urge to shout, "Oh yeah!" like the Kool-Aid Man. It's in this third classroom where I look out the slightly open door and see that the wall of flaming debris is right outside, meaning I just have one more classroom to go through to get past it. Knowing that I'm close to getting us out of here, I quickly smash through the back wall of the third classroom. I peek out the door of the fourth classroom and see that I am now past the flaming debris that blocked our path. Excited that my plan actually worked, I jog back through all the holes I made, carefully pick up the still unconscious Tessa, and head back to the fourth classroom. After I walk out the door into a fire-free hallway, I carry Tessa down the staircase and head for the main floor. However, when I'm almost to the main floor, I realize that getting there won't do us any good because that's where the fire is so much worse. There's no chance we'll be able to make it all the way through this floor to the main doors, so I am going to have to find another way. As my mind races to come up with a solution, I press my back to the cool brick wall that separates the staircase from the outside of the school. Feeling the brick on my bare back helps remind me that I should be able to break through this wall just as easily as I broke through the classroom walls upstairs. So after I carefully lie Tessa down on the floor of the stairwell, I take a deep breath and sprint right at the brick wall. My shoulder connects with the wall, and the impact causes a huge chunk of brick to break away. I quickly take a step back from the wall as the few bricks I broke away cause a domino effect, and a section of the wall dislodges from the school and falls down outside. With a way out finally in sight, I pick Tessa back up and carry her through the giant hole I just made. I may have slightly overdone it with how hard I hit the wall, because I have to watch where I step so I don't trip over one of the hundreds of bricks that now litter the grass. After just saving Tessa from a burning building, I didn't want to ruin my heroism by tripping on a brick and landing on top of her. When I finally step away from the last of the bricks, I look over at the school's parking lot and am relieved to see the large crowd of people gathered there away from the burning school. It seems like a few people from the crowd are getting into cars or on buses, however the majority are just standing there watching the school burn. It takes people a few minutes to notice me walking towards them with Tessa in my arms, but when they do, they begin to clap. As I make it to the parking lot, a small crowd of students walks over to me. Most of them just stare at me in stunned silence, like I'm some sort of rock star. However, I do hear a few students commenting to each other about me as I walk past them. Did he just walk out of the school?
Look at his clothes. Was he on fire? Since when is Josh so ripped?
I just ignore all the comments and looks from the crowd of students and keep walking. I notice Mr. Porter, Mary, the school nurse, and a few other teachers gathered off to the side counting students, so I head over to them. The school nurse notices me with Tessa, so she instructs me to lie Tessa down on the grass beside her. As soon as I set Tessa down, the nurse begins to examine her. How is she? I ask the nurse.
As far as I can tell, she probably got knocked unconscious from the smoke inhalation, but she should be fine when she wakes up.
The nurse tells me.
But just to be safe, we'll get the paramedics to look her over when they get here.
The nurse tries to sound confident when she says this. However, I'm well aware that most of her job is just giving students ice packs and band-aids. Nonetheless, she does have medical training, so I'm relieved to hear her say that Tessa will be okay. However, I do find it really strange that there aren't any paramedics or other emergency service vehicles here yet. With the nurse looking after Tessa, I walk over to Mr. Porter and the group of teachers. Is everyone out of the school? I ask them. Most of the teachers turn and look at me with sour expressions on their faces, like they don't want to deal with a half-naked student in this situation. However, Mr. Porter realizes that I'm the kid who helped evacuate the school, so he turns to me. We're not 100% sure yet, but we'll let you know as soon as we find out, he says. Just as I'm about to walk back over to Tessa, Mr. Porter has a delayed reaction to my appearance. He turns back around to look at me with surprise. Josh, what the hell happened to you? I just shrug and say, well, most of my clothes burned off in the fire, and as for the muscles, I have no idea, but the same thing happened to Tessa. Mr. Porter looks over to where Tessa is lying on the grass beside the nurse, who is trying to pour some bottled water into her mouth. His eyes widen when he realizes how different she also looks. Well, don't get on the buses then. We'll get the paramedics to examine the two of you when they arrive. Mr. Porter's about to go back to talking with the other teachers when he remembers something. By the way, there were some kids who were refusing to get on a bus until they talked to you. He points to 3 people standing apart from the crowd of students getting loaded onto the buses. I know who the students are even before they come running over to me. As soon as Mr. Porter waves them over and goes back to talking with the teachers, Ty, Jake, and Luke all come sprinting over. I'm surprised that Chris isn't with them, but I figure that he probably just got forced onto a bus before he could meet up with the others. As the 3 of them approach me, they all stare at me in shock, like I had suddenly grown a second head. Holy shit, Luke says. Did you take a bunch of steroids or something? I grin, glad to be around friends again. No, man, I tell him. I was inside the school when the meteor hit. Most of my clothes burned off in the fire, and now I somehow look like this. I don't really know how it happened, but my best guess is that Tessa and I were exposed to some sort of radiation from the meteor. Wait, she got insanely muscular too? Jake asks me. Kind of, I say, and then I point to where she's lying on the grass. The 4 of us walk over to her. The nurse had left to check on some other students who had gotten a few minor cuts and bruises when they were leaving the school. I sit down next to Tessa while my friends stare at her with the same look they had given me. So she gets to look like a supermodel and you get jacked, Luke says, sounding a bit jealous. I wish I was exposed to this radiation. I smile, but it's just for show. I think about how I lifted that meteor, knocked down brick walls, and walked through a burning building without even a scratch on me. I've never heard of radiation giving people the strength to do these things, and a part of me is worried that I might explode at any second and kill everyone around me. However, I try my best to push this thought aside because I have to be calm for Tessa when she wakes up. She had been exposed to the meteor too, and I'm not going to let me freaking out be the first thing she sees when she regains consciousness. Jake looks back at me and studies my face a bit closer. Dude, he tells me, it looks like all of the cuts and bruises on your face have healed. With everything that had happened, I forgot all about my injuries from my fight with Mike. I blink a few times to see if there is still any pain in my formerly black eye, but it feels perfectly fine. And after reaching up to touch the places on my face that had been bruised, I discover that every injury I had sustained in my fight with Mike has miraculously healed. Without question, I know that the yellow light of supposed radiation that the meteor was giving off had healed my injuries, just like it changed the way Tessa and I look. However, what kind of radiation is able to do that? Yeah, I'm usually a pretty fast healer, and my injuries really weren't as bad as they looked. I tell Jake, not wanting to let him know that the radiation from the meteor probably did this. However, he looks at me with suspicion, obviously unsatisfied by my answer. At this point, I feel like I should be wearing a hazmat suit with a big radioactive symbol on it. I look over at Ty, who has been noticeably quiet throughout our conversation, which is unlike him. Is there something on your mind, Ty? I ask him. He nods. I'm really worried about Chris. His class was in the biology lab on the 3rd floor this period, and I didn't see anyone from that class leave the school. I think back to the class on the 3rd floor that had been writing a test right before the meteor hit, totally oblivious that anything was wrong. They probably would have still been in the school when the meteor hit if I hadn't yelled at them to leave. So it is totally possible that another class full of students is still in the school. I just have to hope that it isn't true. I wouldn't worry about it, I tell Ty, trying to convince both him and myself. I'd say Chris just got loaded onto a bus. Did you try texting or calling him? Ty looks a bit embarrassed. No, I left my phone in my locker. Guess I'm going to have to buy a new one. He turns and looks at the burning school, probably thinking about his destroyed cell phone. I chuckle and pull my phone out of my pocket. Surprisingly, it seems like it's still working, so I stand up and hand it to him to use to call Chris. When I stand, I realize that Ty used to be a few inches taller than me, but we are now basically the same height. Ty doesn't notice though, and just takes the phone from me before walking away to make the call. As I struggle to keep my mind off the possibility of Chris and the rest of his class still being inside the school, I turn to Jake and Luke and ask, "Do you guys mind keeping an eye on Tessa for a second while I go talk to Mr. Porter?" They both nod and Jake says, "Yeah, of course." While I walk over to where Mr. Porter and the other teachers are still going over the class lists to see if everyone is accounted for, I look up at the sky. On my run back to the school, I remember it being a nice sunny day with only a few white clouds in the blue sky. But due to the burning school sending so much smoke and ash into the air, the sky around us looks like it's covered in a gray blanket. The smoke from the school is so thick that I doubt anyone even noticed when the meteor flew back out of the building. I'm honestly relieved about that, because it would have just been one more thing that people could question me about. When I reach the group of teachers, I immediately notice everyone's pale, depressed expressions and a few teary eyes. I unfortunately know this expression well, as I've worn it many times. Even before I ask this question, I know that the answer isn't going to be good. Did everyone get out of the school okay? I ask, loudly enough so they can all hear me. Everyone turns to look at me. I can tell that every single one of them is in shock. And nobody wants to say the answer to my question out loud because telling people will make it all too real. After a long silence, I hear a small voice speak up from the back of the group. The class that was in the biology lab this period didn't make it out. Ty was right. Chris really didn't make it out of the school. He and his entire class are still in there, probably dead because I hadn't warned them to leave. Their deaths are on me. I put my hands on the back of my neck and bow my head in frustration and sorrow. I can't believe that an entire class of innocent students has died because of me. Then, one last thought of hope crosses my mind. Do you think there's a chance they're still alive? I ask the teachers. No one speaks because although everyone wants it to be true, nobody wants to give people false hope. Just as I'm about to completely lose faith that there's a chance the class is still alive in there, a tall older man, who I recognize as the woodshop teacher, steps out from the back of the group. Actually, there is a chance they might still be alive, he says. All eyes turn to the woodshop teacher, who looks uncomfortable with all this attention. Why do you think that? I ask him, desperate for any confirmation that the class isn't dead. Well, he explains, the fire started in this part of the school. He points to the front of the school where the meteor hit. It quickly tore through the west side of the school because most of the classroom walls were built out of wood. But the biology lab is located on the east side of the school. The east side of the building is older, meaning that its walls are mainly brick, so the flames will have a harder time burning through it. That's why I think there's a chance the fire might not have reached them yet. Everyone just stares at the woodshop teacher, who seems like he wants to sneak back into the group so that people will stop glaring at him. His theory does make a lot of sense, because I remember noticing that most of the areas in the school that weren't completely on fire seemed like they were made of brick. It's obvious that everyone wants to believe the woodshop teacher because nobody argues that he's wrong. However, nobody is confirming that he's right either. Before anyone can respond to the theory, Ty comes running up to us, panic written all over his face. With my phone still in his hand, he says, "Josh, Chris and his class are still in the biology lab. Something's blocking the door so they can't get out, and the fire's about to reach them." As soon as he says this, I know what I have to do. It would not be humanly possible to get to them without dying, but I did things that aren't humanly possible just a few minutes ago. It's stupid and maybe even suicidal to go back into the burning school, but everyone in there will die if I don't. While the teachers all begin panicking and calling 911 again, I motion for Ty to follow me. We quickly jog back over to where Jake and Luke are sitting with the still unconscious Tessa. The two of us kneel down next to them and lower our voices so the teachers can't overhear. After Ty quickly fills them in on what's going on, I decide to tell them what I'm going to do. I'm going in there to help them, I say. The three of them stare at me like I had just burst into flames. That's suicide, Jake says. I know they won't believe me, but I tell them anyway. Look guys, to get out of that school, I did things that should have been impossible. There was fire all around me, but I didn't get burned or even feel the heat. I ran through brick walls like they were made out of cardboard. I know that I can save them, and honestly, I'm their only chance. None of them look like they believe what I'm saying. Luke finally speaks up and says, "Man, listen, you didn't get superpowers from that meteor. The radiation from it probably caused your muscles to become inflamed, making it look like you suddenly became really strong. And as for you not being able to feel the fire," he shakes his head like he doesn't want to tell me this. "Josh, you probably got severe nerve damage from the heat." I begin pacing back and forth, knowing that I'm losing precious time with this argument. "Guys," I say while trying to keep my voice calm, "I don't know if I can really get them out. All I know is that it was my job to tell them to evacuate the school, so it's my fault that they're still in there. If they die, their deaths will be on me. So I don't care if I got superpowers from the radiation or just severe nerve damage. I have to try and save those innocent people in that school, or else I will never be able to live with myself." All three of them are as speechless as Tessa. Seeing her lying there unconscious makes me question once again why there aren't any paramedics here. Right now, the only medical professionals that we have at our disposal are a few teachers who know CPR, and one high school nurse who is running around checking on the half-dozen injured students. While I wait for my friends to answer me, I take a quick look at the road that leads to the school parking lot. I was hoping to see some ambulances and a few fire trucks finally arriving at the scene. Instead, I see a line of 6 or 7 army jeeps driving towards us, followed by what seems to be a tricked-out prison transport bus. The jeeps are identical to the one I saw earlier when I was evacuating the school, and now that I can get a closer look at them, I realize that they are also the same as the one that the military man who came into the school yesterday was driving. I'm slowly putting the pieces together, but I'll have to figure out what this means after I help Chris's class. I have a feeling things are going to get interesting when the people in the jeeps arrive. My thoughts are interrupted when Ty speaks up. "Go," he says. "Go and save them. We'll make sure that no one tries to stop you." Luke and Jake look at Ty and then nod in agreement. I nod back at them, grateful that they're letting me go. I'm not sure if they're telling me to go because they believe that I really can save everyone, or because we're desperate and have no other options. It's probably a mixture of the two. Just as I'm about to run towards the school, someone grabs my arm. I turn around and see the last person I thought would say something about this.
"Don't."
A now half-awake Tessa tells me.
"Josh, I don't know how we got out of the school, but I don't think it was anything more than dumb luck. If you run back in there, then there's a good chance you won't come back. So please, don't go."
I'm so shocked by Tessa suddenly waking up that I'm unable to come up with a response, and I just stare at her. Although she is no longer unconscious, her eyes are only half open and she looks a bit pale and sickly. Despite her weak appearance, she has a surprisingly strong grip on my arm for someone who just regained consciousness. In fact, it's a surprisingly strong grip for anyone. When I finally get over my shock, I remember that I don't have time to argue with Tessa. Every second that I waste out here is one more second that those people are stuck inside the burning school. With this thought in mind, I gently pull her hand off my arm and then kneel down in front of her. "I know it's dangerous, Tessa, but I have to try and save them," I tell her softly. She pauses for a moment and then quietly says,
"But you could die in there."
As I look at Tessa, whose concern for me is written all over her pale face, I try to think of the perfect thing to say to convince her that I'll come back unharmed. My fingers instinctively begin fiddling with my necklace, just like they always do when I'm nervous about something. I look down at the necklace and suddenly come up with the perfect thing I can do to comfort Tessa. I reach around my neck and, for the very first time, take off my necklace. Tessa stares at it as I slowly place it in her hands, and then she looks back up at me, confused. "I promise I'll come back for that," I tell her, "but until I do, keep it safe for me." Before she has a chance to respond, I turn and run as fast as I can towards the school. The instant I do, I hear Mr. Porter and a few other teachers yelling after me. I glance back to see that Mr. Porter is starting to chase me, but as soon as he steps onto the grass, he gets tackled from behind by Luke. Despite the circumstances, I laugh. I'm sure Luke would normally get quite the detention for tackling the school principal, But considering the school is on fire, he might get away with it. Now knowing that nobody is following me, I pour on speed and run to the burning school as fast as I can. I'm shocked by how quickly I'm covering the distance, as it seems like I'm able to run way faster than what should be possible. I zip past the front of the school, and in what feels like an instant, make it to the hole in the wall where I had exited the building with Tessa. I stop in front of the hole, expecting to be out of breath from my run, but I haven't even broken a sweat. Thick smoke and ash are now billowing out of the hole, but it seems like the staircase is clear of flames for the moment. As I try to work up the courage to enter the school, I turn around to see a few people running towards me. But I had covered the distance far faster than they can, and I know they won't get to me in time. However, I hear them yelling at me not to go in, which doesn't exactly give me the boost of confidence I need to do this. Despite their warnings and all common sense, I enter the burning building. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this chapter, then please remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel. New episodes of Strength drop on Tuesdays and Fridays, but if you'd like to see the chapters early and support the channel for only $5 a month, then head on over to my Patreon page. Link is in the description. Also, you can purchase the full paperback novel on my website if you're in Canada, or on Amazon if you live outside of Canada. Thanks again, and I'll be back in a few days with the next episode.